Hey everybody, welcome to Adapt or Perish, episode 60, A Room with a View. As always, before we check in, let's talk about our next episode. This time, we're going back to the Disney well with 1961's The Absent-Minded Professor starring Fred MacMurray, and its 1997 remake Flubber starring dear, sweet Robin Williams. This episode held some surprises for us, and we can't wait for you to hear it. That's in 2 weeks on Tuesday, February 25th. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections about today's episode that you'd like to hear on the show, remember to email adaptorperishcast@gmail.com or tweet at us using the AdaptCast hashtag. If you enjoy the show, we'd love it if you would share that with the world by leaving a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find the show notes from this and all other episodes at adaptorperishcast.com. And with that, on with the show, Adapt or Perish, episode 60, A Room with a View. Welcome to Adapt or Perish, a podcast about adaptation. I'm Jeremy Latour.
And I'm Arielle Lipshaw, and today we will be discussing E.M. Forster's 1908 novel, A Room with a View, and its two movie adaptations, 1985 and 2007.
So apparently we like Forster
Yeah,
on this show?
apparently. Jeremy, like many late-in-life converts to something, has become evangelical about his love of Forster.
Forster's fucking great.
Yeah.
Here's my assumption. My assumption is the world does not understand that Forster's great. The world is not on the Forster train, and I am like alone on this train right now.
No, my assumption is that Forster is an incredibly popular author of the early 20th century, and
No.
you never noticed him before.
Nah.
All the times.
That can't possibly
all
be
the
it.
times that anyone mentioned Forster, you went, and then you finally read Forster and discovered that there was a reason for someone being one of the most incredibly popular novelists of the early 20th century.
I find your appraisal suspect.
Okay.
I do. I think that's bogus. No one ever sat me down. The world had so many opportunities to sit me down and look me in the eye and say, "Hey, Forster's great. You should read him." But that never happened.
Yeah, that sounds like an entitled point of view to me.
I mean,
what do you expect? Do you expect the world to hand you Forster on a silver platter?
Yes.
Read a book.
All right. Well, well, here we are. Okay. So, yeah, spoiler alert. I fucking love this book. It's great. Forster's awesome.
The end.
This is your favorite Forster, isn't it?
I really like this book. It's really funny. I think this was one of the first, I'm into 19th century, early 20th century fiction. That's one of my favorite genres. And this was, I think, one of the first sort of quote unquote classic books I read that I was like, oh, this is funny. Classic books can be funny. Forster has a really modern sensibility.
That was the thing that shocked me in Howard's End.
Yeah.
Just how modern it sounded.
Yeah, it's very modern. The part where, this is kind of jumping way to the end of the book and talking about characters we haven't introduced yet, but the part where Lucy argues with her mother, I was just rereading that part today and thinking, God, how do you understand so well what about a mother gets on the nerves of her 20-year-old daughter? How do you get into the head of that person so well? I don't understand. It's so relatable and modern and funny, but also very much of its time.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much about class in Forster and social position, but he's not mocking it in the sense that it's a broad satire, but he's kind of deconstructing it.
I think there's some mocking going on.
No, I just mean it's not like a Saturday Night Live comedy broadly making fun of it. He's subtle in his mockery of it.
Yes, that's true.
Do you know what I mean?
I would argue that the first part of the book is not subtle in how much he's mocking,
Miss Lavish.
Yeah, he's very mocking in the beginning.
Yeah,
but that's more about tourism.
Yeah.
Yeah, and cultural appropriation and stuff
Right.
like that. Do you want to do a back of the book?
Yeah. Do you want to read it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm holding a copy of this book. This is just a normal everyday copy of A Room with a View. That is. Do you have anything to say about this copy of it?
Yes. Can I talk about how I acquired this copy?
Yes, absolutely.
So a couple of years ago, I went on a trip to Europe with work. And so I was very much in the personage of the extremely obnoxious tour group because I work for a company that runs high school tours. And so we get to go on tour sometimes. So I was with a group of 40 high school students being dragged through the streets of Rome, Florence, and Paris. So like if you've
And
ever
I was at
traveled
home.
and you were at home with the dog, and so if you've ever traveled and felt like self-conscious or conspicuous about being a tourist, like go on a group tour, because it really just makes you lean into it and embrace it, and you'll never feel self-conscious again when you're like just by yourself. Because there's really nothing worse than like trooping through the streets of Paris with 40 obnoxious teenagers.
Yeah, having been one of those high schoolers in the like Paris trip that I went to in high school, yes, I can agree with that.
Yeah, all with the identical backpacks.
Like from the tour company.
Yeah, exactly. So the first half of this book takes place in Florence, and it was a book that I really, really loved. So when we were in Florence, we were walking up and down, and actually we were right across the street from the gallery where the David statue is, which is a very small gallery, and pretty much the only thing in it is the statue of David. So you wait in line for an hour, you see the statue, you go, that's a very big statue. And then you walk back out, and then you don't have to meet up with your tour guide for another hour and a half. So you're wandering up and down looking for things to do. But there's an English language bookstore right there. And I thought I was going to be really cool and original and buy myself a copy of A Room with a View in Florence, because Florence, as I say, is where half of this book takes place. So I walked into the English language bookstore and I found Forster, and they had, I think, Howard's End, but they didn't have A Room with a View. So I went up to the person behind the counter and I was like, do you have a book by, it's an author named Forster? I don't know why I thought she wouldn't know the book A Room with a View. So anyway, I went in and I was like, do you have this book? It's called A Room with a View. She was like, yeah, we can't keep it in stock. We don't have any copies of it right now. She was like, yeah, everyone who comes to Florence wants to buy A Room with a View. I was like, damn it, I'm not original. So anyway,
I'm going to go back to the hotel and not talk to anybody for the next 48 hours.
Yes.
Goodbye.
So then when we were in Paris, a couple days later, I went to Shakespeare and Company, which is the English language bookstore in Paris, and bought A Room with a View. So that is where this copy is from. The end.
Now,
end of story.
So from my perspective, you came back and told me this story. I at this point knew nothing about A Room with a View. So just a super quick thing, like my assumption of A Room with a View, I think came from a weird thing my brain did where it took the poster of Remains of the Day and kind of made up a story about how the Room with a View is clearly a room in an estate that has a nice view where a lady owns it and her butler is like lots of things happen in that room with a view.
Well, you probably had a connection through Howard's End because the Remains of the Day is Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson.
Yeah.
Right? So like just your brain I can see how your brain would sort of take that leap.
No, this is from years ago.
Oh,
this
okay.
This was from before I knew anything about any of these.
Gotcha.
Where like my experience of Merchant Ivory was the posters for the Merchant Ivory movies.
Gotcha.
That was basically it.
Gotcha.
So I do apologize. But anyway, so you came home and you told me this story. I knew nothing about A Room with a View. Fast forward to like a couple of weeks ago that I'm finally reading this book and realize that the entire first half of this book is this scathing indictment of tourists.
Yes, correct.
And here's my question for you. When you think about this story in your head, at what point do you realize that, how do you feel about the fact that Forster would make you the butt of the joke?
Oh, bad. No. I'm not saying it was a good thing.
This book. Can I do this back of the book now?
Yes.
So it begins with a quote. You love the boy body and soul, plainly, directly, as he loves you. Lucy has her rigid middle-class life mapped out for her until she visits Florence with her uptight cousin Charlotte and finds her neatly ordered existence thrown off balance. Her eyes are opened by the unconventional characters she meets at the Pension Bertolini, flamboyant romantic novelist Eleanor Lavish, the Cockney Signora, curious Mr. Emerson, and most of all, his passionate son George. Lucy finds herself torn between the intensity of life in Italy and the repressed morals of Edwardian England, personified in her terminally dull fiancé, Cecil Vyse. Will she ever learn to follow her own heart? A Room with a View is a sunny, brilliantly witty comedy of manners.
Yeah. I think I would say all of that is true.
That actually gave away a lot more than I expected. I'm glad I didn't read that before I read the book. Like when I was reading the book, I meet George and I meet like the Emerson son and I meet Cecil, and I kind of was able to find my own conclusions about them as I was reading.
Well,
and the book really just tells you, it like the back of the book really straight up tells you like, here's how you're supposed to feel about these two characters.
I don't mean to contradict you. I don't mean to contradict you at all.
I don't know how you can contradict my experience.
Or accuse you of lying, but you're lying right now.
What?
You didn't form your own conclusions about the characters. You got through the first chapter and you came to me and you said, just who's the love interest? And I was like, why don't you read the book? You're like, no, just tell me. Like, is it George? Like, does she end up with George?
That is not what I said at all.
All right.
Okay. So first of all, I didn't say like who's the love interest. I'm like, who is the relationship? I was wondering like of the characters that I had met already, who is the one that okay. I don't like how I'm being presented right now. That is wrong. That is an incorrect. And I am the only thing that's making this okay for you is that I can't remember what I said, but I know it wasn't that. So go fuck yourself. Let's keep talking.
Wow. I'm the mother of your child.
I know.
So the other thing that you should know is if you Google Room with a View LibriVox, you will find my reading of this book, A Room with a View, that you can download for free. LibriVox is a volunteer-run audiobook website of works in the public domain. And I used to do a lot of stuff with them. So you will actually find, I think it's like version 3 dramatic reading. So it's the kind of recording where there's different voices for all the different characters. It's not just like one person reading it all the way through, which I am... If you like the sound of my voice, I'm both the narrator and Lucy in that one. So, so instead of rereading the book for this episode, I actually re-listened to my own recording of it, which was kind of an exercise. It was just embarrassing for everyone, I think.
I feel like the experience of you listening to yourself read this book is kind of like how Forster always puts himself in his books.
Yeah.
Like is there always just like a shitty younger brother?
Yeah, apparently. Well, you've never experienced like true narcissism until you're listening to yourself say something in a recording and your phone hears it and Siri thinks you're talking to it. Because that was an experience I had.
You'll forgive Siri for getting confused.
Siri was confused.
Do you want to talk about this book?
Yeah, let's talk about the plot of this book. So I'm going to go into a little bit further depth than your wonderful back of the book summary.
It's okay. I don't like a back of the book that tells me how to feel.
So the main character, as Jeremy mentioned, is a young lady named Lucy Honeychurch, who has gone abroad for the first time with her cousin Charlotte. I always want to say Charlotte Lucas, who's the character from Pride and Prejudice. So if I accidentally say Charlotte Lucas, I mean Charlotte Bartlett. But she has gone abroad with her cousin Charlotte to do her grand tour of Europe. And the action begins. They have just arrived in the Pension Bertolini, which is their hotel in Florence. It is full of English people, and they meet several characters there who become important throughout the rest of the novel. One is Miss Eleanor Lavish, who is a novelist who plans to write a novel skewering the English tourist.
Spoiler alert, she's the fucking worst.
Yeah, she's the worst. They meet the Miss Allens, who are two spinster sisters who are world travelers.
Spoiler alert, they're the fucking oldest.
They're very old. And they meet Mr. Emerson and George Emerson, father and son, traveling together. Who are free thinkers and atheists and but also common, like middle class people. You know, they have jobs, which is terrible.
Oh yeah.
You don't want to associate with people who have jobs.
That's why I asked you about who the romantic lead was, because they are clearly terrible.
They're clearly terrible.
Like, clearly George is terrible.
And they also run into someone that they know from before, Mr. Beebe, who is their parson at home. They just happen to meet him there at this Italian hotel. So several things happen to them while they're there. Lucy has this encounter with George Emerson where she is out walking by herself, which she's not supposed to do, and she sees a man get stabbed to death right in front of her, and George kind of rescues her and brings her back and to the hotel, and they talk, and she finds him very interesting. So maybe I should explain the title. So they get there and they find that the hotel is not what it was advertised. Like the food isn't very good, and they asked for like rooms with a view, and they got rooms without a view. And the Emersons offer to switch with Lucy and Charlotte because they have rooms with a view, and so they switch rooms, and that is how they make the acquaintance of each other. Mm-hmm. They go out one day on a drive.
This is after the murder.
After the murder. Mr. Beebe and this horrible parson that lives in Florence, Mr. Eager. He's the absolute worst. And Miss Lavish and everybody goes together, and they go out on a drive through the Italian countryside, and it's very beautiful. And they go on this picnic, and Lucy comes across George in the middle of a beautiful field of flowers, and they both lose their heads. And George kisses her. He kisses her, even though they're not married. It's terrible. And Charlotte discovers them and is very upset, and it is just this terrible scandal.
Some say she's still clutching her pearls to this
She's
day.
literally clutching her pearls, and it's a terrible scandal. And they go off to Rome and meet up with Cecil Vyse and his mother, and the book picks up like a couple months later, and we're back at Lucy's house in England, and she and Cecil have just gotten engaged. Is there anything else from the first half of the book that is important to mention?
Not really. I mean, just in terms of the characterization.
Yeah.
So the thing that I appreciated about the book is that George isn't set up from page one as the romantic lead.
Mm-hmm.
Like I really didn't get that from him.
Yeah.
He was just this guy, and I actually felt like Forster was making him kind of weird.
Yeah, he is kind of weird.
He's weird and standoffish and awkward, and I don't know, the scene where he kisses her, my reading wasn't like they both lost their heads.
Yeah.
The scene I read as this super awkward guy came up to her and like grabbed her and kissed her,
Mm-hmm.
and she didn't know what to do about it.
Right.
So when I was asking you about like who the romantic lead was, it was like, okay, is he just a weird guy she meets before the romantic lead, or is he gonna be the romantic lead?
Yeah.
I was just wondering.
That's okay.
I can ask questions
You can
about
ask
it.
questions.
Like, I also hate when people in the middle of the movie go, "Hey, what's gonna happen?" Like, I hate that. But like, that doesn't affect that. I'm not beholden to that.
That's fine. I will say one word that you will see if you choose to read this book that comes up over and over is the word Baedeker. Baedeker was like the tour guide at the time. It's like the Lonely Planet or like Fodor's tour guide that everybody had. So everybody who went to Florence who was English basically did all the same things because that was the book that told you like what to do and what everything meant. So Forster just makes fun of people in their tour books, but he does it in a funny way because he does it through a character who's making fun of people in their guidebooks. Because Miss Lavish is like, "You tourists with your guidebooks, God, so middle class, so boring, so banal." But he makes her terrible as well. It's very interesting. Like the things that she's saying aren't wrong, but she's saying them in an obnoxious way.
This book just really, really makes me want to be a quiet tourist for the rest of my life.
Yes.
Because I want to go to places. I like being a tourist.
Mm-hmm.
Like let me rephrase that. I like touring.
Yes.
I like going on tours
Yes.
of places and seeing new things. But this just makes me want to like, I don't want to interact with anyone.
Yeah.
I don't want to embarrass myself. I don't want to look at a place. Oh my God. I just want to be there and sit and look around and eat some food and never have anybody look at me as a tourist ever again.
I mean, I will say,
mortifying.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, as someone who's been to Florence, it is one of the most touristy places I've ever been.
Oh, I mean, that's my experience about most places.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been to Disney World. You know what I mean? Florence, the city center area, I'm sure if you like go out into the countryside, like it probably becomes much less touristy almost immediately. But the city center area where like all the cathedrals are is very small. The way we learned this, it was one of the most unpleasantly hot and humid places I have ever been. And apparently the way that Florence sits in a valley, the heat like comes down into the valley, but then there's no wind to blow it back out again. So it just, the humid heat just sits on top of Florence. I've never been so sweaty in my life. There is nowhere with air conditioning. Unless you go to the Opera Museum, you can go and stand in the gift shop of the Opera Museum. That was the one place I found that had air conditioning in all of Florence. I just stood there for like 20 minutes on top of an air conditioning vent. But it's, I mean, you know, if you like art, it's a nice place to go. If you like leather, they do a lot of like leather. I have that little dog keychain that I got in Florence. But I never even went inside any of the cathedrals. Like there's just like lines and lines and lines of people waiting to go into these like cathedrals. So that was my experience of Florence. I was only there one day. I didn't like it. The end.
That's all it takes.
Well, it sucked. I mean, maybe if I had been there, honestly, if I had been there, like not as part of a huge tour group and hadn't had to take like a 3-hour walking tour in a bajillion degrees wearing a backpack, I probably would have liked it better.
I can imagine. I'm just saying this Yelp review you're writing sucks.
I didn't enjoy Florence. The other thing I will say,
Hot, no AC, 2 stars.
2 stars. The other thing I will say, just jumping back to, I was talking about my LibriVox recording. You will hear me mispronounce Baedeker as Baedeker the entire way through. I realized I was saying it wrong about halfway through and could not at that point go back and re-record all the places I had pronounced it wrong. So I decided to just stick with the mispronunciation. Everybody else in the production says it right. I'm the only one that says it wrong. It's very upsetting. It's spelled B-A-E, so it looks like it could be either Bay or By, and I just said it wrong.
Unfortunately, it would make sense. Like that would make sense for Lucy as a choice to pronounce it wrong.
Yeah, but I as the narrator also said it wrong.
That's not so good.
It's not great. It's not great.
All right, so the book changes.
Yes.
So that's the whole first half of the book. It's
first
this
half of the book.
Incredibly witty, satiric skewering of tourist culture that is one of the best things I've ever read.
Yes.
And then we get the second half of the book.
Yes.
And we're back in just England.
In England. We're in Windy Corner, which is Lucy's home.
Mm-hmm.
We meet her mother, Mrs. Honeychurch. We meet her brother, Freddie Honeychurch. Mr. Beebe is there because he's their parson. And we learn that Lucy has just become engaged to Cecil Vyse. He has asked her 3 times, and the 3rd time was the charm, and she has agreed to marry him.
Now, because you mentioned when you were talking about how the first act ends,
yes,
you said they go to Rome and meet Cecil. We don't know about that.
We don't know about that. They go to Rome to. She had a letter from Cecil. Oh, we're staying in Rome. I'm staying in Rome with my mother. Charlotte is like, we have to get out of this hotel because you kissed George Emerson, and the chapter ends like that night they left for Rome or something like that, and then the next page we're already back in England, and it's like 3 months later. And
then Freddie gives us some exposition about how Cecil proposed to her twice and she said no both times, and then he asked her again and she said yes.
Yes,
I do like the way Freddie puts it, that clearly she said no wrong because she said no in a way where he thought he could ask again.
Right, exactly.
I really enjoy just like Tibby in Howard's End. Freddie ended up being one of my favorite characters in this. I just you
just like the shitty little brother.
I don't know why I like a shitty younger brother so much.
So we learn that the great neighborhood scandal is that someone has built this local landlord, Sir Harry Otway, has built these cottages for middle class people that aren't very expensive. So that's not very good because we're going to have people with not very much money moving into the neighborhood. And Lucy has this idea that her friends, the Miss Allens, would like to live in one of these cottages. So she starts up all of these arrangements to have those friends come and live there. In the meantime, Cecil's the worst. I don't know if we've established that Cecil's the worst, but he's the absolute worst. So Cecil, as a joke, he doesn't really know that Lucy knows the Emersons. It's a huge coincidence, actually, come to think of it. But
that's how books work.
It's how books work.
That's how stories work.
He runs into the Emersons at the National Gallery, and he thinks they're very common. So to play a joke on Sir Harry, he recommends them to come live in these cottages. So instead of having the Miss Allens come live there, the Emersons come live there, and Lucy finds out about it, and she's rightfully very pissed off at Cecil for doing that. Why would he do that? Anyway, so the Emersons, or the dad, the son lives in London and comes up on the weekends because he has a job, which is, very common. It's very common to have a job. And by common, I mean, bad.
Yeah.
And the old dad lives in their neighborhood. So hijinks ensue, including an episode of naked bathing.
Well, because Freddie really takes to George.
Yeah, Freddie takes to George, so he invites him to come swim naked.
It's one of the best scenes in the book when Freddie meets George for the first time, and the way he starts the conversation is, "Do you want to come have a bathe?
Yeah.
Do you want to come get naked with me in a pond?"
And George is like, "Yeah."
And George's like, "I'm in." And Mr. Beebe is commenting on how women would never start a conversation with that, and men start it's great. It's great. It's great.
It's fantastic.
And they all get naked.
Cecil is just an unbelievable douchebag throughout.
Can I interrupt?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. I would only disagree with one thing.
Yes.
You said he's a douchebag, but he's not an unbelievable douchebag.
No, he's actually very nice when she, spoiler alert, eventually breaks up with him.
Yeah.
He takes it really well.
The thing I like about Cecil, Cecil is actually my favorite character in the whole thing. Cecil's amazing. He's not a great person.
No.
He's pretty shitty to a lot of people, but he's incredibly entertaining.
Yeah.
And the other thing about it that I love is the way that Forster sets up this world and sets up this society. As a reader of this for the first time, I didn't see it as a foregone conclusion that Lucy wasn't going to marry Cecil.
Gotcha.
They had a relationship where she clearly didn't feel that strongly about him, and he clearly didn't feel that strongly about her, and he's kind of a douche, but she's also really shitty and immature sometimes too.
Yes.
But the society would say they belong together, and I could see a version of this story where they do get married, and I would still enjoy the book.
Yeah.
But as you say, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, so there's this incident that happens. So an important thing to know is that before they left Florence, Charlotte made Lucy promise not to tell her mother about the incident with George Emerson in the field of violets because she thought Mrs. Honeychurch would be mad at Charlotte for not being a good chaperone, essentially. So they're all lounging around one day. George Emerson is there playing tennis with Freddie, and Cecil's got this book. And he's like, I got this really bad book out of the library. Let me read you this terrible passage, which is a fun thing to do. That's a thing we do.
Yeah.
And he starts reading out this
is our 60th
passage.
Episode of doing that.
Yeah, and it turns out that it's Eleanor Lavish's book that she's finished.
Coincidence number two.
And the scene that he starts reading is sort of a point-by-point exact description of the kiss between Lucy and George Emerson that happened in the Field of Violets. So Lucy goes to Charlotte and she's like, you told Eleanor Lavish. You are the only person that could have told her. You swore me to secrecy, but you told this novelist and you thought that would be fine? And then Charlotte utters your favorite line of the whole book. Never, never shall Eleanor Lavish be friend of mine. And Lucy's like, yeah, well, good. That does not help the situation, even a little.
It's why it's my favorite.
Yeah.
It's the least helpful thing. She thinks she's helping. She thinks she's making the situation better. And then it's the last thing
It's just
that
the
Lucy
opposite
needs
of
to
helpful.
hear.
Yeah.
Cool, okay.
Great. I'm glad she won't be your friend anymore.
This book really set me against Charlotte.
Yeah. Except, spoiler alert, she turns out to be good in the end. So Lucy has another encounter with George. She says, go away. He says, but I love you. She says, I do not care. He kisses her again. He leaves. And she, of course, completely unrelatedly, immediately breaks off her engagement with Cecil.
Well, hang on. No. You're skipping over something really important.
I'm so sorry.
And that's the conversation they have.
Right.
Because it's fantastic. This was the part of the book that felt the most modern to me.
Yes.
This one conversation between the two of them. Because this is the conversation where he says to her, typical kind of nice guy thing of you're going to marry Cecil. He's a jerk.
Mm-hmm.
He can't love you.
Mm-hmm.
He's incapable of loving people.
Yes.
You shouldn't be with him. You should be with me.
Yes.
Because I love you.
Yes.
And she says, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially she says, so what you're saying is you're accusing him of being too controlling of me, and you think the solution to all of my problems is to do what you say.
Right. Yes, she does say that.
And his response is, oh, fuck me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
yes,
you're right. You're not wrong.
I'm very sorry.
I'll go.
I'll
see myself out.
It's great. Most modern conversation in the entire book. I
Yes.
can't believe that was written 110 years ago.
Yes.
And then it's echoed later because she does have a similar conversation with Cecil, but I don't want to step on your toes.
Yeah. There's this whole breakup scene where she is explaining to Cecil all of the reasons that she can't marry him. And he's kind of like, yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I'm a little upset that you didn't mention this before now, so I could have had the opportunity to change, but I can see that, in your mind it's gone too far, and I'm really sorry. And,
I'm also clearly guilty of all the things you've been saying.
I absolutely have done all those things, and you have my greatest respect, and let's shake hands. He's great. He really takes it very well.
And then I love him at the end of the book because his whole thing is to me, in my memory, defined by two things. One, he just turns into a big sad sack.
Yeah.
And two, he's nice to Freddie.
Yeah, he's nice to Freddie. Everybody's fine.
Because he wasn't nice to Freddie. That was one
Right.
of her problems, is that he was really shitty to Freddie.
So then Lucy kind of freaks out. She doesn't know what to do with her life. She decides she has this crazy plan that she's going to go to Greece with the Miss Allens, and she drags her mother down to London to have tea with them and to buy a guidebook for Greece. And her mother's like,
A Baedeker.
Yeah, a Baedeker.
I'm just sorry. I thought it was Baedeker.
No, it's Baedeker.
I listened to this audiobook and I remember it being Baedeker.
Wow. Just way to rub that salt. Rub it in the wound.
You brought it up. I had no idea.
You're making fun of me. And her mother's like, what are you doing? You are dumb. This is not good. They have this amazing argument, which is, again, extremely modern. And then I'm not exactly sure what happens, but they come back home and there's some machination by Charlotte that enables Lucy and old Mr. Emerson to get into the same room together, where he kind of, in Mr. Beebe's house for some reason, where he kind of forces her to admit that she loves George.
Can I stop you for a second?
Yeah.
Can we backtrack for a second?
Yes.
Let's talk about Mr. Emerson,
Okay.
because we haven't really talked about what he's like as a character. So he's great.
He's great.
How would you describe him? Like, he's crotchety.
Yeah.
He's not crotchety. He just doesn't seem to have time for anything that he deems as unimportant.
Yeah. You know what he would be like the modern equivalent of Mr. Emerson?
Yeah.
Is like an old hippie, know?
Yeah.
That like really believes in love, but that was like 40 years ago.
Yeah. And like, he's over protesting. He's not like protesting like capitalism anymore. But if you ask him about it, he'll say, I mean, obviously, like, capitalism's fucked up and it destroys people's lives.
Yes.
Like, obviously that's true, and I'm not gonna put up with conversations about it. But like, I'm not going out and protesting anymore.
Yeah. Well, he's sort of had his heart. He tells Lucy this like sweet, terrible story about his wife, and like she agreed with him not to have their son baptized, but then he got really sick and she got really scared, and just all of this stuff happened, and then she died before like they could kind of make up this argument that they had, and it's very sad.
Mm-hmm.
But like that's why he loves George so much and wants to be so close to him, because it's just kind of been the two of them for a long time.
Like, clearly, Mr. Emerson and George's relationship is the best relationship in the whole book.
Yes.
It is the best, most pure, most unproblematic relationship of two people who just genuinely love each other.
Yes, that's correct.
It's great.
Yes.
But yeah, those are the things I really like about him. He's just so matter of fact. He's very romantic.
Oh yeah. He believes in love.
He's a romantic.
Yes.
So they come to this conversation where he's telling her, look, here's what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm going to lay this all out for you because you're nice and I care about my son.
Yes.
So he says to her, and stop me if I'm misremembering any of this.
Go for it.
But he says things like, yes, he handled himself badly, but he loves you and you love him. That was that quote from the back of the book I read.
Right.
To him, the conversation and the issue has nothing to do with how anybody has treated each other. It all has to do with two facts.
Right.
George loves her and she loves George.
Yes.
There's great, Forster sprinkles in such beautiful things throughout the book about her like coming to terms with the fact or not coming to terms with the fact that she's fallen in love with George.
Yeah.
Like when she breaks up with Cecil has this thing where he says like, you've become a different person, and her immediate reaction.
Or he says something like, it sounds like you're talking like someone else, like someone else is speaking through you. And she's like, what do you mean? What are you talking about?
I'm not in love with someone else.
What? How can you possibly say that? Everyone always says that there's someone else, and it's so rude and so wrong. I'm not in love with someone else. And he's like, I did not say that, and I don't think that. Now I kind of do.
So that's that quote, and he's just presenting it as, it doesn't matter how anyone has treated each other, you can't change the past, but at the end of the day, you love him and he loves you.
Yes.
So why shouldn't you be together?
Yes. And she's like, it's impossible, and he's like, it's not, and they have this whole conversation, and that's the end of the second to last chapter, and in the last chapter is kind of the epilogue. Lucy and George are married, and they are together on their honeymoon in Florence, making out.
In the room
with a
view.
The end.
Well, two things.
Yeah.
One, let's talk about that title, and two, the end? Question mark? So I was going into this book thinking like, okay, the title.
Yeah.
Is the title because like Howard's End was easy.
It's the name of the house.
Yep, it's just right there. A Room with a View, like, yeah, they say it at the beginning, but then there's also weirdly like a metaphorical level to the title.
Well, it's all about like the shades falling away from you. The book is about like learning to see clearly.
Well,
so the room has a view. You can see out of the room.
But that doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter.
The Room with a View is literally a room with a view.
It's literally a room with a view of Florence.
I wanted to find something more, and I didn't think Forster was giving me what I was looking for.
That's fine.
And that's totally fine because it's his book, and that was totally okay. Second point, the end.
Yes.
There's a fucking appendix to this book, and it's a goddamn fucking bummer. So when was the first time you ever read this book, approximately? How old were you, would you say? Would you say?
College.
Would you guess?
College.
Okay, so you read this book like 25 years ago.
I was not in college 25 years ago, but okay.
You read this book a million years ago. When was the first time you ever read the appendix to this book?
Today.
What was your response to the appendix for this book?
Well,
let me set it up really quickly. So basically, 50 years later, in 1958, Forster wrote an appendix. It's not in every edition of the book.
Apparently not.
It is in the edition that you bought.
Yes.
And I found out about this, and I went immediately to look, and yes, it is there. It's basically, I'm going to read how it starts. A Room with a View was published in 1908. Here we are in 1958, and it occurs to me to wonder what the characters have been doing during the interval. Then that's it. And then we get 3 pages of him kind of like waxing poetic about where would they be? What are the things that they did?
Yeah.
How maybe did World War I and World War II affect them?
Yeah. Well, so you asked me a minute ago, like, what did it make me think of? And not to spoil anything, because we're going to come to it in a minute, but it certainly made me dislike the ending of the 2007 version more.
Well, you're skipping way to the end.
I know,
here.
that's what I'm saying. I'm not going to say why for a minute. I think I want to leave it until we get to it.
Well, I'll say what's in the appendix.
Yes.
So a number of things happen. He talks about how like George and Lucy's marriage falls apart because he goes to war and cheats on her.
Well, I mean, like, not that their marriage falls apart.
Like on an emotional level.
Yeah. But like at that point, he's 50. Like you skipped World War I, where he became a conscientious objector,
yes.
and they kind of got cast out of their society, and in the meantime had 3 kids.
Right, and that's the whole thing too. Is like there's a lot of stuff in the book. Howard's End too, just about the relationship between like British and German culture.
Yeah.
So clearly George is not going to fight in World War I.
Right.
Specifically, as Forster calls out, because he doesn't see either side as being bad. But then in World War II, of course, George is like, oh no, Hitler's very bad. I need to go fight.
Yes.
And becomes like a corporal or something
Whatever.
like that.
Yeah.
And cheats on Lucy while he's out there.
Fantastic.
And so we get just these 3 pages of just bummer after bummer. And
then they die.
And it's kind of fascinating. Like, why is this here? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
He just like really 50 years later, he decided he needed to revisit his own work.
Maybe he just got tired of people asking him like what happened to these characters.
I mean, maybe that could be.
Maybe it really is just a result of that. Because here's the deal. I'm trying to put myself in the mind of E.M. Forster being asked for 50 years about what happened to these characters and people wanting to know about their happy life and him finally going like, you know what? Fuck all of you. I'll tell you what actually happened to them and you're not going to like it. But you asked. And here we go.
There's the same thing at the end of Pygmalion. George Bernard Shaw writes like an appendix, what happened to Eliza Doolittle and Henry Higgins, and it's not good.
I can't imagine it's good.
It's not good.
That relationship doesn't have legs.
It does not have legs.
So that's the book.
Yes.
Good book.
Good book.
Very good book.
Excellent book.
I enjoyed it a great deal.
So in 1985, some obscure filmmakers named Merchant and Ivory made a film version of A Room with a View. I mean, I will say like I was just making fun of you for saying like that Forster was a little bit obscure and being mad that no one had told you about Forster. But for being a well-known book, there are only 2 movie adaptations. Like we could not find any additional ones. You would think there would be more, but there's just these 2. No, I have a feeling you're going to tell me.
I am going to tell you. So here's some information that I found out.
Okay.
So apparently in 1946, 20th Century Fox came to Forster and said, we want to make a movie of A Room with a View.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, no, because movies are stupid and I don't want that.
Okay.
And after he died, the rights reverted to like, I can't remember what college it reverted to.
Okay.
But then years later, someone else said, oh, yes, movie money? Oh, yes, I'll take some movie money.
Mm-hmm.
That's totally fine. And Merchant and Ivory came in, and apparently they thought they were going to make Passage to India.
Okay.
And their response was like, no, we want to do Room with a View. And they're like, oh, the little one about like Italy and like the room with the view? And they said, yes, please, we'd like that one. And they did it. And it was like lots of accolades and stuff like that. But yeah, here's the big thing about this.
Yes.
How fascinating would it have been to see a version of this movie like from the era of Casablanca?
Oh yeah, I think that would be really, really interesting. Like if there was a much older version, I think that would be very, very cool. But there's not. So it's useless to speculate.
I feel like we've been robbed.
Yes. No, I do too. Like like with Olivier or someone, like who would the cast be? Like it's just fascinating to think about.
Yeah. Like imagine what 35-year-old woman would have played Lucy.
Yeah. For sure.
Oh, it would have been great. But anyway, that's why there aren't that many adaptations.
Yeah.
And so, but please continue.
So this is a really good movie. I've seen this movie a bunch of times, and I'm pretty sure I saw the movie before I read the book. And the reason that I think that is because whenever I read the book, this is always in my head. Like these characters are how I picture the characters, and usually that happens when I see a movie first.
Yeah.
But the cast of this movie is so amazing. Like I feel like we're going to keep comparing this to Howard's End because that was the thing we loved so much about Howard's End was how well cast it was. So Lucy is played by Helena Bonham Carter. a very, very, very young Helena Bonham Carter.
Like actually age appropriate.
Like actually
which is
age
amazing.
appropriate and like perfect for the role. Like literally in the book, he describes her as like a small pale girl with masses of dark hair or something like that.
Yeah.
Like she really looks exactly like described in the book. Charlotte Bartlett, God, I almost said Charlotte Lucas again. Charlotte Bartlett is Maggie Smith, who looks great. This is like peak Maggie Smith, where she was like just starting to get old, but like not like old Maggie Smith yet. She looks beautiful. She looks great. Who else is in this? Simon Callow is Mr. Beebe. Daniel Day-Lewis is Cecil.
Can we hold off on him for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just kind of going through the cast, but I'm kind of trying to do it from memory.
Eleanor Lavish.
Eleanor Lavish is Judi Dench. Like, this is an amazing cast.
We have the Emersons.
Yes.
So Mr. Emerson is Denholm Elliott.
Yep. Who's great.
Fresh off Indiana Jones.
There it is.
He's just wonderful. And we have George Emerson, played by Julian Sands.
Yes. What did you think of the cast?
Okay. It's hard for me to talk about this without talking about how I felt about the movie in general.
Okay.
And I've had a little while. We watched this like a week or two ago.
Okay.
So I've had some time to think about it. And I want to be very careful about how I say this. Much in the same way that I responded to Howard's End.
Yes.
This is an immaculate, wonderful movie. I didn't like it.
Well, I think you didn't like it for a really similar reason that you didn't like Howard's End. You didn't like the music.
That's part of it.
Like, you didn't like the way that the music set the tone, and you didn't think it was funny enough.
Well, what I didn't like is the tone.
The tone.
And the music is part of it.
Yeah.
I would just reverse those things.
Yeah.
Where, like, to me, reading the book, it was incredibly satirical, incredibly funny. And then I watched the movie, and the thing that frustrated me is that some people were in the movie that I saw in my head.
Yeah.
And some people weren't.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, like, I said I wanted to come back to Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah.
His performance as Cecil, apparently they came to him. I mean, who knows? So many of these stories are apocryphal, and without James Ivory sitting here, I can't know. But apparently, he had his choice of whether he wanted to play George or Cecil.
Oh, of course, anyone would want to play Cecil.
I'm so glad he played Cecil.
Yeah,
because he's incredible.
Yeah, he's so funny.
It's by far the funniest performance in the movie.
Yes,
like by far.
Yes.
And I struggle to think of how many people could have delivered a performance as funny as this. He doesn't just understand about where the humor comes with Cecil. He understands where the heart comes from. I don't hate Cecil in this movie. I don't think Cecil's terrible. He just sucks.
Yeah.
And that was Cecil in the book.
Well, so like the epitome of Cecil is the manly bathing scene.
Yes.
Which, by the way, we started watching this movie, and sometimes I write down funny things that Jeremy says. And my very first note on this is when you realized Simon Callow was playing Mr. Beebe, you were like, am I going to have to see Simon Callow's dingle? And I was like, yeah, you see it a lot, actually. You see it more than anybody else's dingle in this movie. So basically, these three guys are like frolicking and wrestling naked in the water, but like it's not gay or anything.
Oh, good. Oh, I'm glad that our audience knows. I'm glad the audience of this show knows that there's nothing gay happening in this scene.
It's super gay, you guys. It's like super gay.
Yeah, it's pretty gay.
Yeah, it's real gay. So anyway, I was talking about Cecil's reaction. So he is walking with the ladies, right, through the woods. He's with Lucy and her mother. And they realize that there are these naked men just like running around, and they don't even realize who they are for a minute. And he just immediately like takes control. He's like, oh, this way, ladies, this way. And he's like using his cane to like swashbuckle through the undergrowth as if it's a machete. Like, oh, please, come this way. And like the ladies are both like screaming and giggling. And then remember, like Freddy's like hiding in the tree.
Yeah.
And then they realize it's Mr. Beebe, and they start like screaming again. But he's like, oh, it is now my manly duty to lead these ladies away from this danger. And he's taking himself very seriously, and it's fantastic.
He's incredible.
Yeah.
He's incredible. But then on the other side, I didn't like Julian Sands in this movie. I asked you at one point, like we're about two-thirds of the way through it, and I just said, like, honestly, tell me, do you think Julian Sands is a really good actor in this movie?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what he was necessarily playing. You know what I mean? Like, it just didn't seem to match everyone else's performance. I just didn't think it was bad. Like, I think you responded to it more negatively than I did. I didn't care. I didn't like, it didn't make that much of an impression on me either way, but I guess maybe that's because like I don't find George to be a very interesting character.
And that's a bigger problem.
Yeah.
Like, they definitely, oh God, they tried to do some things. How do I want to say this? Okay, I'm just going to come out and say it.
Okay.
I don't think Merchant and Ivory knew what to do with this character.
Okay, that's fair enough.
And to be clear, too, I'm also talking about Ruth Power Jabvala, who wrote the movie and won the Oscar for her adapted screenplay.
Gotcha.
We talked about the three of them in our Howard's End episodes in more detail.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think they knew what to do with him. The book presents him in a few different ways, but the book makes it work a lot more. Like the swings between his character. Like the book will call out very distinctly that in one moment he was very childlike, and then in another moment was very mature.
Yeah.
That's literally like I'm paraphrasing a passage in the book. And that's, I think, hard to show, but I don't think it's impossible to show. And I don't think the movie does a great job at this.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything in this movie that's bad.
Yeah.
I just think this is one of the parts of the movie where, like, no, George is good, but, you know, Cecil is great.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about George is that I think they tried to add some stuff to make him like a more interesting layered character. Like the scene where they go on the picnic, he's like swinging from a tree and screaming like into the wind, like all of these different just words like peace, love, truth. And the other people are like looking at his dad going like, what's he doing? And Dan O'Malley is like, he's saying his creed. And when I reread the book, I was surprised to remember that that's not in the book. That was something they made up for this movie. And that scene has always struck me as like kind of awkward, but I think I'd always thought like, oh, I guess this is like the kind of thing that like comes across better on the page than on the screen. And I realized they had just made it up for this movie. It's not in the book at all. And I guess they just kind of added it to give him a little more to do and be like a more interesting character, but I'm not sure it worked. Didn't work for me.
His character doesn't work for me that much in this.
Yeah.
Like it was weird to me that Lucy would fall in love with him.
Yeah. Well, my favorite scene of his is actually when he rescues her from the stabbing situation, and he helps her, and like she drops her postcards and that she just bought, so he has to go get them, and then he realizes they're like covered in blood, so he has to dispose of them, and they have this like nice walk and this nice conversation, and I like that scene of him. Like I like him in that scene. I like the character, and that's where Lucy kind of starts to fall for him, and like that part I like. And then he kind of becomes more eccentric as the book goes on, and like becomes like more of a child, I think. And then if I were Lucy, I would not find some of his behavior like particularly attractive.
Yeah. Like one of the things I like about the book is that Lucy is falling in love with him, but she can't even really explain it.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's one of the things that makes it work, where I feel like in the movie they are trying to explain it.
Yeah.
They are trying to show him as someone who she would fall in love with. But I don't think their choices are great.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't work for me.
Yeah. I will say, like, regarding the screenplay, I mean, one of the things that really worked for me, so this is the female character is not particularly underwritten segment. And you know, shocker, this screenplay was written by a woman. The scenes between the female characters are really interesting.
Yeah.
The relationship between Lucy and Charlotte is really interesting. The relationship between Lucy and her mother is really interesting. The relationship between Charlotte and Eleanor Lavish is really interesting. Like, there's all of these cool, like, female duos in this movie, and they're all like really fully realized. And just, I don't know, there's a scene with Lucy and her mother, and they're kind of arguing about Cecil because Cecil's being annoying and like kind of thinking he's better than them and like really looking down on them and being a jerk, and while he's like living with them and staying with them in their house. And Lucy and her mother are kind of having this argument while her mother's getting dressed, and Lucy's like, can we please just stop arguing, like everything's okay. And her mother like says something like, yes, absolutely, and gives her like a hug and a kiss and says, come lace me up behind, old girl, or some old lady, or something like that. Like, that you immediately know this is something she asks of her a lot. She really loves her daughter, and she has this like cute pet name for her daughter, none of which has to be explained. It's just like this little piece in this one scene. And I just really like that feeling of people who know each other really well, where we don't have to have every little aspect of everything that's ever happened to them explained. We just know it. Like, for example, like, Lucy's father is not in the picture. No one ever comes out and says, yes, my mother, the widow, after my father died. But Lucy's mother just has this one line about like how her father picks out the living room furniture, and so we have to live with it. Obviously, her father is dead. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Just I love stuff like that you know exactly what's going on and you don't need a lot of exposition, because in the book, right, like we often know what people are thinking, but something that Forster sometimes does is say things like, well, she could have said this but didn't, which is hard to convey in film. And I think this movie the screenplay does a really good job of conveying subtext without having people have to come right out and say this thing that I am thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does.
Yeah.
This is not super related, but I just remember at one point in the book he actually writes he writes a line that she thought, and then immediately later she's saying the line.
Yeah.
Like the line comes in twice, but it has to be from the context of this is what she was actually thinking and it's what she was actually saying.
Right.
This is the way I need to show a character.
Right.
It just works so well. So I guess before we move on to the other one, are you okay if we kind of take stock on this one?
Sure.
So I want to ask a couple questions and just get quick answers from both of us to see if we agree.
Okay.
Is A Room with a View 1985 a good movie?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Is this a movie that you love?
Yes.
No.
Okay. That's okay.
No, I'm just kind of taking stock.
Yeah. Okay.
Is this movie a really good adaptation of A Room with a View, of the book?
Well, I think you're going to say no, but I think it is.
I think it's good.
Yeah.
I think it's a fine adaptation.
Like, I think it could be a little bit better in terms of the tone. I don't think the tone is perfect, but I do think it's a really good adaptation of the book.
Yeah. Like, here's some things I think the movie does really well. It is an incredibly beautiful romantic movie.
Yes.
Incredibly. And that's what it was going for.
Yeah.
But my question is that what Forster was going for in his book? I'm literally asking the same question of Howard's End.
Yeah.
In our other episode.
Yeah.
And I just, having now looked a little closer at Forster, that doesn't feel right to me.
Mm-hmm.
It feels a little wrong.
Yeah.
But it's still a really good movie.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is, yes, it's a fine adaptation. I personally don't feel like it's a great adaptation.
Totally.
And some people may come at me for that.
Probably.
So I apologize. It's a really good movie.
It's a really good
really,
movie.
really good movie.
Yes.
And for some reason, they looked at this movie that had won many Oscars and had been nominated for even more, and BAFTAs and all kinds of stuff, and said, we need to remake this for the small screen on the TV.
On the TV.
And they did that in 2007. ITV made an adaptation of this in the UK. And before we talk about it, I want to read a quote from the ITV director of drama, Laura Mackey,
Okay.
about this adaptation.
Please
at
do.
the time.
Great.
Laura said that this adaptation, quote, captures the spirit of Forster's most memorable novel, but delivers it in a fresh, engaging way for a modern audience. Now, before you respond to that, because I can see that you want to respond, I want to say one other thing about kind of preparing for this. Because, did you know anything about this before we watched it?
No.
Like, did you look into it at all?
No, I just was like, I know that they made a newer version than the 1985 one, and I'm not going to watch it because I want to watch it for the podcast.
Yeah.
And I'd been saying that to you for like 2 years.
Right. So something I will sometimes do is I'll go to like Letterboxd or IMDb and see what like the ratings are for these. This one is poorly rated.
Yeah.
And I glanced at some of the user reviews and they were low. And I was determined not to judge this movie before I saw it.
That's good.
I really wanted to give it a chance because I know that the Merchant Ivory one is beloved.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to give it a chance too. Like, I liked, we did Howard's End. I liked the newer Howard's End. We both liked it pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
There have been a couple of really good kind of new versions of really beloved things in the last couple of years. We haven't done Sense and Sensibility yet, but there was a newer Sense and Sensibility a couple of years ago that I thought was really, really great. And I love, the Emma Thompson one from the 90s. So like there was nothing to make me think that this was not going to be good.
And then we watched it.
And
And again, I was just determined to not be set against it from the very beginning. There are some things I liked about it. We'll talk about those. But I feel like we can't go any further without just kind of acknowledging right off the bat, is this successful?
I did not find it successful.
What are some of the reasons for you why that didn't happen?
Well, so the movie opens and you see a young lady who's clearly Lucy wearing a short bobbed haircut and a flapper dress walking through Florence. And I looked at, and it says Florence 1922. And I looked at you and I was like, did they change the time period? What? Okay, I guess like that's an interesting choice. Turns out it's a flash forward. So Lucy has come back by herself to Florence in 1922. We do not know why at the beginning of the movie, but she is by herself checking into the pension Bertolini.
So let's talk about who's probably responsible for this decision.
Yes.
So the director of this is a guy named Nicholas Renton. I don't even think he's important to talk about in terms of this. I do think it's important to talk about who wrote it.
Yes.
And that's Andrew Davies.
He's famous for adaptations. Like, that's his thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Famously for us, he wrote Pride and Prejudice, the 1995 BBC version.
And he's done everything. Like, he's done every adaptation.
Mm-hmm. This script is full of choices.
Yes.
This script is full of very deliberate choices that clearly he made. So this was one of those ones where, like, this is Andrew Davies.
Yep.
I feel perfectly fine saying that. And then there's the stuff that happens at the end, which we will get to as we go through all of this.
Yes.
So we open up. We've got this flash forward.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's in the room, she's remembering, and then we flash back to the normal opening scene. She's in the pension Bertolini with Charlotte at the dining room table, and it's their first night, and she's complaining. So Charlotte is played by Sophie Thompson, who I admire greatly.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a problem with this. Because
she's not Maggie Smith.
No, actually, that's not my problem at all. I mean, first of all, like, I would argue that Maggie Smith actually is too beautiful to play this role, but at least she's like significantly, obviously older than Helena Bonham Carter.
Yeah.
Sophie Thompson, like, is probably actually the right age, but she looks very young and she's extremely beautiful. So, like, you don't get the immediate, like, understanding of, like, oh, this is like an older spinster and this young ingenue she's accompanying on her trip to Europe. They just kind of look like friends, because I bet they're closer in age, the two actors, than you would imagine.
Yeah.
would be my guess. I actually don't know. So, like, not to harp on people's ages, but I feel like Sophie Thompson is a little bit miscast, and not because she is a bad actor, but frankly because she is just, like, too young and beautiful to play this part. Okay, Jeremy just did some quick math. Maggie Smith and Helena Bonham Carter are 32 years apart in age.
Which is appropriate.
Sophie Thompson and Elaine Cassidy are 17 years apart in age, which is, like, not, it's not crazy for people who are cousins to be 17 years apart in age, but if Lucy is only supposed to be 20, like, that would make Charlotte like 35, which is not like a dried up old spinster. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's whatever. Anyway,
I always got the impression that Charlotte was her mom's cousin. Like,
yeah,
like,
I mean,
like I was saying, assuming she was the same age as her mom,
as her mother,
like, very
yeah,
specifically.
That makes sense. I don't know that is specifically given to us by the author, but that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So we've got some problems so far. We have a problem with Sophie Thompson. I have a problem with the performance, honestly.
Okay.
And as with everything, I'm not necessarily blaming the actor. I'm blaming the writing and the direction.
Yeah.
As maybe more so than the acting. She was an overdramatic jerk.
Yeah.
Through this whole movie. Like, I found her incredibly upsetting most of the time. I hated this character.
Yeah.
So much.
Yeah.
Maggie Smith was fun and Sophie Thompson was not.
Yeah. So going down the table, we also have a piece of stunt casting in the form of an actual father-son couple cast as the Emersons.
Yep.
And while I get Timothy Spall in this role, I get it. Like, he does a good job, I think, as Mr. Emerson. Rafe Spall was my least favorite casting decision in this movie. I did not think he was right for the part at all. I thought he was terrible in this role.
I could not disagree with you more.
Wow.
Rafe Spall's great. I think he was a fantastic piece of casting.
I hated it.
The casting isn't what fails the character.
Yeah.
It's the writing and direction that fails the character.
All right, I guess that's fair.
Like, if you say that George is your, like, most hated depicted character in the movie,
yes,
then I agree with you.
I guess that's what I mean.
He's terrible.
But
I think Rafe Spall is good.
You don't want to blame Rafe Spall for this?
Not even a little.
That's fine. I just, like, he seemed like a serial killer a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's not Rafe Spall's fault.
It was his fault when they cut over to him looking at Lucy and he had that, like, really creepy smile on his face.
I think he is a goddamn working actor, and I think he did what the script and the director asked him to do.
All right.
I don't blame him. And I would actually go so far to say that the thing that had the most potential in this movie to be good is the duo of Rafe and Timothy Spall.
Mm-hmm.
And they were failed by this production.
Okay.
They were failed so hard by this production.
I think that your love for Rafe and Timothy Spall is maybe blinding you a little bit.
I think
Your
they're good.
pre-existing love for those actors.
I think they're good actors. I think they would have been just fine in this. I think the characterization of George is abysmal.
Gotcha. I mean, I guess it's a tie between Rafe and another character for like my least favorite performance in this movie, because I also thought Cecil was nothing.
Yep. Terrible.
They went with sort of, so the characterization that Daniel Day-Lewis did was they went with sort of like a very like fussy, like priggish type of person, like very tight-laced and like kind of a dandy in terms of like how he was styled. But like a prig. That's the word that I associate with him. In this, they went with like a much more bohemian look. Like he wears a lot of capes.
Yeah.
They went with sort of an Oscar Wilde thing for Cecil in this, which is appropriate because they also decided Cecil's gay. We are going to hit you over the head with telling you Cecil's gay at every possible turn. At one point I wrote down, "Do you think he's gay?" in all caps.
Well, let me interrupt for a second.
Yes.
Because we need to backtrack.
Yeah.
Because before we find out about Cecil and maybe being gay, we meet Mr. Beebe.
Yes.
Who is played by Mark Williams.
Yes.
Of like the Harry Potter movies. He's real fun. A decision was made. And we were wondering at the beginning as we were starting to get into it, it's just like, are we just reading into this? Is this subtext? Like, no.
It was not.
It is text.
It's text.
Mr. Beebe is gay in this movie.
Yes. Yeah, he literally, at the end of the movie, he says to Lucy, like, "It's a good thing you broke up with Cecil. He's a person like me who really shouldn't be married to a woman, but maybe he doesn't know that about himself yet." Or words to that effect.
Yes.
Yes.
How did you feel about this?
I hated it a lot.
Why?
Because E.M. Forster is an incredibly subtle writer who writes gay characters incredibly subtly. There is no need for anyone to come out and be like, he's gay. Did you know he's gay? Because the author was gay? So it's funny because he writes about gay people. The author, he's gay, so they're all gay. I mean, it just felt like Andrew Davies like had something he really wanted to say. But like, it goes along with the thing that was my overarching problem with this movie, which was that so many things that should have been subtext and were beautifully conveyed as subtext in the 1985 film were text. They were just text, just someone would come on screen and say a thing. I mean, I have so many examples. Do you want me to get into it?
Yeah.
So Lucy and Charlotte are talking in the hotel room after this scene with the kiss in the violets or whatever. And Lucy says to Charlotte, "You know, I have to admit I kind of enjoyed it." Which is something that in the book, like, you know from the beginning that Lucy did kind of enjoy it. But it's something she can't even admit to herself until the very end of the book. That's literally Lucy's journey throughout the entire book. That, oh yeah, you know what? Actually, I did enjoy it when he kissed me in that field of violets. Like, that is literally the journey that that character has to go on. And we're just told that plainly from her mouth at the very beginning. So I didn't like that. Like a couple of other things, just like so many things that the authors, the screenwriters clearly felt had to be explained to us. So like one of the funniest jumps in the book is that sort of chapter break that we talked about when they go from Italy back to England, which is the last line of one chapter is, in the morning they left for Rome. And then the next chapter begins with Cecil proposing to Lucy and being accepted. So we know that Lucy met up with Cecil and his mother in those intervening 3 months, but there is nothing like shown to us of that passage of time. And it's a really abrupt transition, and it's funny because it's so abrupt, and it's interesting because it's so abrupt. But in this movie, they decided they needed to spell it out to us by showing them go to Rome and showing them with Cecil and the mother, and showing Charlotte and Cecil's mother having a conversation about what a good pair Cecil and Lucy would be, and showing the first two proposals. Like, everything had to be shown, and it just makes it made me as a viewer who had read the book feel like the screenwriter didn't trust me to be smart and understand things that had happened in the past. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I think I might be a little bit different on this one than you are.
Yeah.
Only because obviously in a book you can just say that something happened.
Yeah.
And the reader will picture it in their mind.
Yeah.
I actually don't have a problem. When we were watching this, as soon as they were in Rome, you were immediately like out of your chair.
Yeah.
Like, fuck this movie. What the fuck is this shit? I have no problem with adding a scene in Rome where you see Cecil propose to Lucy.
Yeah.
On its face, I have no problem with that.
Gotcha.
But I do, like you, have a problem with how it was executed.
Yes.
And that's the really big problem here. This script feels like it suffers from something that we've talked about on the show before, where in the author's mind, a scene has to be a complete scene. Scenes begin when characters enter the scene, and they don't end until a character leaves the scene.
Yes.
You have to see all of it. You can't just cut to one part of it.
Right.
I said this a lot in the Howard's End episode, that like a modern filmmaker who I think would be perfectly suited to adapt Forster is Wes Anderson.
Yes.
And he is one of many filmmakers who gets the idea that if you want to show something that happened in the past, you can just cut to it, show it, and cut back.
Right.
And not lose the momentum that you have going in a scene.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Like that happens all the time in his stuff, and I feel like Forster does the same thing without directly calling it out. Like he doesn't have half chapters where you suddenly are somewhere else.
Right.
But a character will refer to something happening in the past, and you as a reader, you get like a little micro scene.
Right.
In the other character's description.
Right.
And all those micro scenes work just as well as the bigger scenes.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
Yeah. But in this, we need this entire very long and dour scene where we have Cecil propose and Lucy says no, and the scene continues for some reason.
Exactly.
It takes us forever to get back to England. Yes.
That's what I'm saying. Okay, I have two more examples.
Okay.
At least two more examples of this like text versus subtext thing. The first one is, okay, so this is the scene where Lucy and Cecil are walking and they walk to the pool in the woods, the one where we get the naked bathing scene a little later on. And Lucy is just it's just like one of your childhood, taking like your boyfriend back to like all the places that you know from your childhood. And it's this pond in the woods that they used to swim in. In the 1985 version, and also I think this tracks pretty closely with the dialogue in the book, Lucy says, yeah, Freddie used to swim here. And Cecil says, oh, did you swim here too? And Lucy says, yes, until I was found out. And then I think only in the book he says, oh, who found you out? Oh, it was Charlotte. Of course it was stupid Charlotte.
She sucks.
Yeah. But that was all that needed to be said. I was found out. To imply the thing that the 2007 version spells out for us in excruciating detail. It's the same situation. Cecil says, oh, did you bathe here too? And Lucy says, yes, until my mother discovered that I was also bathing naked with my brothers and told me that I was too old to be doing so. Like, yes, we get it. Like I was found out. That's literally all you need to say. We understand. We understand the entire context. You don't need to go into this level of detail about why it was wrong. Like, this entire plot is about doing the proper thing. We get it. It was improper. So that's one.
Okay.
And then the second one, this was my favorite, and I didn't even think about this one until this morning because I finished listening to the rest of the book. So the scene where Lucy goes to have tea with the Miss Allens and her mother. This is after she's broken up with Cecil. And then she and her mother have a really big argument about why she feels like she needs to go to Greece. And her mother's like, you hate our home. Like, you want to be away from us. I don't understand you. I'm so upset by this. And in the book, the text literally reads something to the effect of, Lucy could have said, George Emerson is in love with me and has been bothering me, which would have had the advantage of being true. Like, It literally says, Lucy could have said this, but of course she couldn't possibly say that. Like, she didn't know how to say it and didn't say it. In the 2007 version of the movie, she looks her mother straight in the face and says, George Emerson has been bothering me, and I hate it, and I can't make him stop, and like storms out. And so like literally the complete opposite of what the book says that character does in this moment. Like, the thing that the book says, well, she couldn't possibly say that. She just says it right out to her mother.
Right.
And like, not that I think that any one of these things are so horrible on their own that like something needed to be explained and the screenwriter explains it, but just taken together, it made me feel as a viewer that the screenwriter thought I was stupid and needed to have things painstakingly spelled out for me in a movie that's not that long. It's like an hour and 45 minutes.
Well, let me ask you this.
Yes.
I don't have a tremendous amount of experience with Andrew Davies' work.
Yes.
In fact, at this point, the only two things that I have spent any time like thinking about are Pride and Prejudice and this.
Yes.
So what do you think it is about him as a writer that would make him really well suited to adapt Jane Austen, but not well suited to adapt E.M. Forster?
Honestly,
Yeah.
this is pure speculation. Like, I don't want him to like sue me for saying this.
Oh, let's engage in some wild speculation
here. This
here.
is pure speculation. I suspect that Andrew Davies as a human being feels more connected to E.M. Forster than he does to Jane Austen. I really feel that way. So with Jane Austen, he can take the book and just kind of deliver the book. Like, he is actually really good at just taking the book and flipping it into a screenplay without adding too much or subtracting too much.
So let me go a step further with this, because one of the things that we found when we talked about Pride and Prejudice is that the passion is all under the surface.
Yes.
That's like one of the beautiful things about the book, is that they're very passionate characters, but because of the time they live in, they can't be passionate.
Right.
So he's dispassionately adapting something.
Yes.
And not pulling those things out and making them overt.
Right.
And that actually works for the source material.
Right. But I just got the impression from this that for this particular story, he had something he wanted to say.
Yeah.
And I think it may be a talent versus taste thing. Like, he's really good at writing dialogue that sounds natural in people's mouths. Like, the Pride and Prejudice is great. Or at least taking dialogue that is written on the page and turning it into a screenplay. But I don't think he's good at making up original plot. And so when he tries to do that, he falls flat. And I just think I truly think he felt more passionate about this adaptation than Pride and Prejudice. It just struck me that way. And I think all the stuff about the gay characters, I think that's Andrew Davies like really wanting to say something and that was important to him. I just don't think he did a good job.
I feel like it would be different if it was any of the, like, either of the main characters.
Yeah.
Like, we're not learning anything about the main characters of the story. We're learning some things about some secondary characters.
Right.
And I feel like that if you want to, because as you said before, there isn't anything in the text that says that these characters can't be gay.
No, and they probably are gay.
Yes.
Like, I think, I mean, there is stuff in the text about Mr. Beebe, like, being a bachelor and Cecil, like someone, I think, George Emerson says to Lucy when he's trying to convince her to break up with Cecil, like, he says he's the sort of person that can't know anyone intimately, especially a woman. And then Lucy repeats it to George, and then I think she repeats it later to Mr. Beebe or something.
She repeats it to Cecil.
To Cecil, and he's like, "What? What do you mean?" And she's like, "I don't actually know what I mean. I'm just kind of repeating something someone else said." But Mr. Beebe gets involved. Like I actually think Mr. Beebe is gay. I don't know if Cecil is gay in the text, and I think like Forster being gay, like, knows that gay people exist. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I don't think we're reading too much into it to say that he intended that to be a gay character, but I just think it's like a disservice and almost insulting to Forster because he was so beautifully subtle about the way that he wrote those traits into that character to make them so overt. And for Mr. Beebe just to like say to Lucy, "Yeah, I'm gay and so is Cecil, he just doesn't know it yet." Like, he wouldn't say that. It's 1904. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Totally.
That's my opinion. I didn't like this film. Oh, so we have to talk about
I was going to say, where do we go from here?
We have to talk about
I'm
the
glad
framing.
you know.
We have to talk about the framing device.
Yeah.
This is the thing I hated the most about this. So at the very beginning, we see Lucy in 1922 checking back into the pension Bertolini. The whole book plays out just as, you know, the book does. They end up back in the hotel, like making sweet love in Florence or whatever.
Yep.
Then the next shot is poor old George dead on the battlefield. It's World War I. He has died. And so now we understand that Lucy coming back in 1922 is a widow, and she has come back to after the war to like see Florence again. And she like, there's this whole scene where she like drives out, she manages to track down the same coach driver, which I can't imagine is even possible.
Not even track down. Again, just coincidence.
Just coincidence. She just runs into him.
Which actually, now that we've acknowledged all of the coincidences in the original novel, that doesn't bother me as much.
That's fair enough. So anyway, same coach driver. She has him drive her out to the same field, and she goes into the field and she has a moment, and that's the end of the movie. So I did not like this. I did not like it. I did not like it even one little bit.
And I find that that's true for a lot of people from what I've found about reactions to
Yes.
this movie, that a lot of people don't like it. But from what I could see, the majority of the bad reactions to it are because it's a bummer.
Right. It is a bummer. It's a terrible bummer.
But is that your problem with it?
It was originally.
Yep.
And then you had me read this appendix that I didn't know existed that talks about like what Forster thinks would have happened to these people later on. And you said to me, I wonder if them doing this little framing device is like a salute to the fact that Forster actually came back and revisited what would have happened to them in the intervening 50 years.
I don't wonder. I'm convinced that that's
You're
what
convinced
it was.
that it was. So my reaction to that was, but that makes me hate it more because in that appendix, he literally says, George became a conscientious objector in World War I. So the idea that someone read that and went, oh, okay, well, I'm going to make George die on the battlefield in World War I. Literally the opposite of what Forster intended to have happened to that character. Like, it's one thing to make it up. It's another thing to know what the author's intention was and to literally do the opposite. I feel like that's like shitty and a bummer. Like, it's both of those things.
Yeah.
I really hated it a lot. It like ruined the movie for me.
I think George got done dirty
Yeah.
in this.
Yes.
And this just goes back to everything we were saying before, that like, how badly do they fuck up this character
Yeah.
in this movie?
Yeah.
I mean, let's go. I want to dig in a little bit more to something you said earlier about how much of a serial killer he is. Like, he is really, really fucking creepy in this movie.
He's so creepy. I literally wrote down, George seems like a predator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, he's constantly going after Lucy the entire time, constantly looking at her, constantly grabbing her. And it's not... It's hard to misinterpret the signals that she's giving him.
Right.
Like, she is making it very, very clear that she does not want him grabbing her and kissing her, but he's doing it anyway a lot.
Yeah, and it makes it worse that in this version, Lucy is written as actually a lot more strong and confident and independent than the 1985 version. Like, in the 1985 version, and also the book, I think, like, George would do something and Lucy would just like freeze and not know what to do. Like, her eyes would just get really big and she would just be confused and scared. And in this one, she just seemed a lot more confident, and so her reaction to George was a lot more like, no, you should not be doing this, I hate it. And he was just doing it over and over and over again, like he was not stopping.
Mm-hmm.
As you say, it made it more upsetting because she could not have been more clear about what she wanted.
And the thing I was looking forward to the entire time was, as I said before, the most modern piece of conversation in the entire book, when Lucy says, you are mad at me because I am letting Cecil control me.
Mm-hmm.
And you think the solution is to just let you control me.
Yes.
At which point, again, George says, oh, yes, you're very right. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry.
I'll show myself out.
Yes, he does.
This is the story where that needs to happen.
Yes.
Because he's so abrasive the entire time.
Yes.
And it doesn't happen.
Doesn't happen.
Doesn't happen at all. They have the scene where that would happen, but it's just another chance for him to say, I know it's better for you. I'm in love with you. He's terrible.
He literally says, like, go wherever you want. I'll track you down.
Yes.
Like, stuff like that. Like, it's terrible.
Yep. Yeah, it's real bad.
Yeah.
I keep coming back to the fact that, like, I don't think this is Rafe Spall's fault.
Yeah.
He delivers, I think, the most delightful moment in the entire movie.
Okay.
Which is back to that great time where Freddie walks up, meets him, and the first thing out of his mouth is, do you want to have a bathe? And in this one, George's reaction to that, it is so quick and pleasant and delightful. He's just immediately greeted by this, and he just looks right at him and with a smile on his face just goes like, yeah, that's great. And then they immediately start walking away.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only moment in this entire fucking movie that felt like something that was appropriate for an adaptation of this book. One moment.
I'll give you one other moment.
There were two moments.
I'll just give you one other.
What was that?
The scene, and they did this really in a really funny way in the 85 version. The scene the morning after Lucy has broken up with Cecil and Freddie is driving him back to the station. He's just like in the wagon, just like huddled in blankets, just very, very, very sad. And it's really funny. The way that they did it in the Daniel Day-Lewis version is he's like dressed in black, like in mourning black. But in this one, he's just got a bunch of blankets wrapped around him. It's really funny.
From what I remember in the 85 version, he's like dressed in black and he's like 50 yards away from the main characters, just like scream singing Dashboard Confessional. Is that what it was?
Yes.
That's what's in my
He
mind.
just goes really emo, is what you're
real
saying?
emo.
Yeah.
Real emo.
Yeah.
God, this movie, do you want to just end on tone?
Yeah, the tone was really, really weird. That's all I wrote down. I was like, the tone is weird. And then I
Yeah.
wrote ominous music. Wasn't there? Oh, during the kiss scene, there was
Yeah.
like super creepy, scary, dark music.
The
It was
music's
really weird.
Terrible in this movie.
Yeah.
Like truly, truly terrible. Like, I'm not saying the music itself was like poorly composed,
Yeah.
but it could not have been a worse match for the material. You mentioned this before that I have a problem with this.
Yeah.
Like this is a prime example of that. There are scenes that if you removed the music and replaced it with something, either no music or something more pleasant, you would read George as a totally different character.
Yeah.
And when he looks at Lucy with ominous music playing underneath, how can you think of him as anything other than a fucking predator?
Yeah, it's really terrible. I mean, it's terrible when I notice it because I usually don't really notice it.
Yeah.
So if I notice it, it has to be bad. And I asked you at one point, like, oh, are you going to rescore some of these scenes like you did with the scene from Howard's End? And you were like, no, it's too much. It would have to be every scene.
Yeah, I did not want to do that.
Yeah.
That was,
Yeah.
this stupid movie.
I'm sorry to end on such a bummer, but we did not like this movie at all. The 1985 one, I mean, I thought was very good. I really like that one.
It's really good. It didn't do it for me, but like it is objectively a really, really good movie.
Yeah.
Like I enjoyed watching it with you too. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really fun.
I didn't love it.
Yeah.
Do you want to do some quadrants
Yeah,
really quickly?
let's do it.
So let's talk about that movie. Do you think that the makers of this movie cared about Forster?
Yes,
Yeah, obviously. It's Merchant Ivory.
Yeah.
Like they cared about this book greatly.
totally.
Were they successful?
Yes.
Yes. Yep. 100%. 100%.
Yes.
Do you think that the creators of the 2007 TV movie cared about the source material?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously I do. I just said that I felt like Andrew Davies had something he wanted to say. Yeah,
Right?
totally.
Were they successful?
No, I would not say so. No.
Like not even a little.
Not even a little.
It just doesn't work.
No.
It really doesn't work.
It's very unfortunate.
Little moments here and there, but as a whole, like, blah.
Yeah.
Blah.
Ugh.
Oh, God.
Good Lord.
Book was great, though.
Yeah. I'm glad that you like Forster. We should do the whole thing. We could do Morris. We could do Passage to India.
I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm totally in.
Let's do it.
He's great.
Great.
He's fantastic.
Fantastic.
Oh, this is really, really fun. I'm glad we did this.
Yay.
Yeah. Well, this has been Adapter Parish. If you'd like to find us online, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at AdaptCast. And if you tweet about the show, don't forget to use the AdaptCast hashtag. You can join our groups on Facebook and Goodreads, and you can also find and follow me on Letterboxd. If you have anything to say that's longer than a tweet, you can always send an email to adapterparishcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, there are two great ways you can do it. First, tell a friend. Second, a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice would be greatly appreciated.
I just want to assure you
Yes.
that never, never more shall Eleanor Lavish be friend of mine.
Oh, that fixes everything.
Yay!
That fixes everything. My problems have gone away. Fucking useless.
Bye.